Everything arrived, everything is here. Now I just need to build up the courage to actually start. This is part 2 of the process of me sewing a ball gown for a gala I'm going to in Norway. If you're interested in the things I covered leading up to this point, you can watch part 1 and then come back to this. If you watch part 1, you know that I'm very intimidated by this sort of dressmaking. I'm sewing my final dress in viscose satin, and that kind of fabric is notoriously hard to sew with. That's why I've really tried to prepare the best that I know. I bought Microtex needles for my machine. I'm going to be using clips instead of pins. And I've done ironing tests to see what kind of heat this fabric can actually take. Now let me show you what the fabric actually looks like. I think it is so pretty the way it falls, the way it shimmers in the light. And it just has a really nice lavender purple color. The dress that I'm making is the Millie dress by Alice Patterns, and this dress has details in bias binding. That's why I bought 20 meters of satin bias binding. So it's this lavender color with this wine red kind of bias binding. And because they're both satin, they both have that shimmer. I'm really excited about it. When I was making this toile, I was kind of wondering if this waistline was a little bit too high for me. And now that I've had some time to think about it, try it on a few times, I think it is actually too high. So I'm going to extend the pattern pieces on the front and the back by a few centimeters and then cut the fabric from there. So what I do when I extend this is really just cut through this pattern piece, open it up and put in a new piece of paper, and that way I can add the centimeters that I would like. But because this is a fitted bodice, it's not just straightforward. I can't cut anywhere. If I cut up here, that will affect the curve of the bust. And I like the curve of the bust on the toile, so it's really just the bottom of the bodice that needs to be extended. I'm going to try to do my cut here at 3 centimeters and then repeat that on the other pattern pieces. Here's my cut. What I'm going to do is place the pattern piece apart in the exact centimeters that I would like. And I'm going to connect these sides. Haven't even really decided how many centimeters I want to extend it. I think 2. Now I can cut away this excess. And here is my new piece. So this was the front bodice right that I extended. I also have the front bodice left, but I'm actually going to just toss this. Now that I have this that is extended, I'm going to use this for both the right and the left side of the bodice. I'm just going to flip it and mirror it on the fabric. This way I hope I can be the most precise. If I try to extend this too, I might get some errors in extending that doesn't match up with this. So I'm going to just only use this. Here they are, the 4 extended pattern pieces. Even though I think I have done it right, I get this feeling that I would like to be sure. I probably should cut one more toile for the bodice just to be sure that it all fits together. I kind of don't want to spend time doing that, but I also know that I will really regret it if I end up cutting my main fabric from these pieces and they're wrong somehow. So, the toile it is. It won't take that long. We can do it. The bodice assembled very well, so no issues there. And This is kind of how it looks on. Just extend it with 2 centimeters. I think it's safe to move on to the satin fabric. I read that satin is just really slippery to cut sometimes, but that it helps if you can do it on a carpet or something that can kind of stop it from shifting. If I was doing this on the table, I would get really wonky pieces, I think, or something that would be stretched out in a way that I don't want it to be. I'm going to start with the longest skirt layer first, and as I did with the toile, I'm going to just draw these waves and then cut them later. So I don't cut them on the floor because that's kind of complicated. I know I'm making a fuss out of this being kind of a hard project because there are so many unknowns and I don't really know how to work with this kind of fabric. But in reality, I actually really enjoy it. I like the challenge, I like learning something new and being able to say, well, I didn't know how to do it, but I did it. And I did it to the best of my abilities. And then I'll be better at it next time. I haven't cut everything, but this is the longest skirt. Look how it's moving. And then this goes on top, and then the third one. And then just imagine all of these edges being kind of accentuated by the bias binding. It's gonna be really, really delicious almost. This fabric is so soft. Look at that. I think this is the first time I'm actually realizing how pretty this is going to be. I had a lot of self-doubt, but now I think I'm actually feeling it. I'm excited. It's been quite a few days since I cut out all the fabric, and I haven't done anything since. I've been feeling kind of under the weather and just procrastinating, trying to make this dress in the daylight and not at night so that I can film it. But now there's only a week until I actually go to Norway, so I have to finish this dress now. When I have the choice, I try not to work on anything crafty when I'm not feeling my best, because my fuse is just a little bit shorter, so I don't have a lot of tolerance for things going wrong or trying to read instructions very carefully. But I will just have to try to suck it up, because I do need to spend today getting as far as possible in this project. So because I feel like I need to ease into it a little bit, I'm going to start with the skirt layers, because that's just straight stitching and should be pretty easy. But that will get a bulk of the project done and give me this feeling of actually doing progress. Now, because the pattern is very beginner friendly, it just says to sew the skirt panels together and then overlock the seam allowance. But because I would like to have a nicer finish on the inside, I'm going to do a princess seam. That means I'll actually be sewing these panels together wrong sides and then right sides, and that will hide that seam. This material is just so slippery and silky. It's quite hard to actually get a hold of. But I'm using my clips to pin it together, trying to not stretch it out in any way. Now I'm trimming this seam allowance down before turning it around and pressing it and then sewing the rest of the seam. I'm using a pressing cloth to try not to give the fabric too much direct heat. Now I'm putting them right sides together. I'm going to be sewing another 1/4 inch seam here, so that when you open it up, the seam is enclosed, and on the back there is no seam either. So here's the first couple of panels for the bottom of the skirt. Ding! And this is my outside seam and my inside seam. Nice and enclosed. So now I will just have to repeat this for the rest of this skirt, the second skirt and the first skirt. So pretty repetitive, but I think it will be worth it to have this nice inside seam. I'm glad I started with the bottom layer because any mistakes that I make here will likely be covered up by the next layer. The next layer is going all the way down here. So even though one of my seams on the back here is a little bit wonky, I don't need to redo it because the next skirt layer will kind of cover it up. So I can use this layer to get a little bit more comfortable with sewing on this fabric and what are kind of the mistakes that I can make along the way. And then when I start working on the bodice where I can't really hide any mistakes, I know more about what to avoid. Like this seam that I'm going to place on the back, it's just a little bit wonky because the two pieces weren't really the same size. They should have been, but they weren't, and that's probably because this fabric is so slippery that it was actually hard to cut it the right size. So you can kind of see a little bit of pulling in the seam. You can tell here by how the seam is pulling to one side and puckering right here, whereas the other one that I made is just straight up and down. Works great. So that's going in the front, the other one's going in the back. It comes at much too high a cost. Here is the bottom skirt, and I think it's pretty clear that this side is a lot longer than this side. That's totally on me. I think something happened in the cutting, making this a lot longer than this side. But luckily I can just bring it up, hopefully, to match with the other side. This is where the next layer will go. This fabric is really nice. It feels really, really nice. The height of the hem is more equal. So I'm going to try to add the bias binding on this layer, just because the instruction says to add it at the end, but then I'd be sitting with this whole dress putting it through the machine, so I thought it would be easier to do it on each layer as I go. That way I can also kind of see the final color combinations a little bit. Bias binding on the first layer is on, and it's only really when you pull it out like this that you can see the scallop. Otherwise it's kind of camouflaged in here. I did notice it does the same thing on the designer's dress, so I think that's just how it goes. Also, it has made the edge kind of stiff, and in some places it's not really bending the way that I would like it to. Ideally, I would have gone in and maybe ironed the bias tape in the direction that I wanted it to go before attaching it. But I only have a few days left to finish this, so I really don't have time to do that. And I think as soon as the 2 other layers go on, maybe you won't really notice as much at the bottom. I've quickly finished the next layer and will now add the bias tape at the bottom hem. I ended up just splitting through the last layer as well, and now it's starting to look like something. I still haven't put the bias binding around the 2 upper layers because I have an idea for how to maybe make it a little bit more neat. But I love that it's getting more volume now. With just a long layer, it was looking a little bit flat, but with these 2 layers, I can imagine it being the kind of princessy dress that I was looking for. It's also quite heavy actually, but look how it moves. So exciting. Good morning. Yesterday I went to the workshop here in town because I had a few ideas about how to make this bias bound curve a little bit more neat. The workshop is not free, but it is public and the fee is very small, so I sometimes go there when I need a tool or something that I don't have at home. So I had 2 goals at the workshop. One was to see if the steam iron could iron out the edge of the longest skirt that I've already bound in bias tape, and it definitely helped. I am a little bit wary of using a lot of heat with my own iron because it's not steam, so I was really happy to try this out, and it did flatten out the bias tape a lot, but it also creates a little bit of wrinkles. Those I can go back and kind of get the technique right. I didn't have a lot of time when I was there, but it is possible to steam it in a way where you don't get these wrinkles. The second thing I wanted to do was clip notches into the bias tape and the seam allowance on the next 2 layers of skirt before flipping the bias binding around and sewing it on. And at the workshop they have the kind of scissor that clips notches automatically. So it looks like this. And hopefully when there's a little bit more movement when you clip a notch, the fabric is allowed to kind of spread out a little bit more. It is going to be easier and more neat folding the bias tape over, attaching it. So that's the plan for today, sewing down the bias tape on the last 2 skirts and then going back to the workshop and the steam iron and ironing it all out, getting it nice and neat, and then finally moving on to the bodice. Here's the skirt with bias tape on all edges. Now I just have to iron them out. Looking whimsical. This project is being stretched out over several days because most days I only have a few hours to work on this. So it's the next day, but I did manage to get all of my bias tape ironed down with the steam iron at the workshop. So now it should all be laying nice and flat. I'm going to baste these 3 layers together, lining up the side seams and the seam in the back. I am a little nervous about the fit between the bodice and the skirt because I'm already seeing that the circumference of the longest skirt is actually longer than the circumference of the shortest skirt, meaning that the waist just isn't the same size. I attribute this to just cutting issues because this fabric is so slippery that it probably shifted when I cut it. But I'm hoping that's something I can fix once I line it up with the bodice and it's clear how everything is supposed to fit together. So here's the side seam for all 3 skirts. As you can see, there's no front seam on the shortest skirt, and that's because I put it on the fold instead of sewing 2 pieces together. I did this because I didn't want a seam right in the front on the top skirt, where it's the most visible. I did end up having to do it in the back because I didn't have enough fabric to do it on the fold in the back. But that's the back. I feel like that's okay. 3 layers of slippery fabric is a challenge, I must admit. So I guess the overlap of the last side seam with the 3 layers isn't as bad as I thought. There's only a little bit that isn't matching where the last layer is kind of sticking out. But it's only like a centimeter or so, less than a centimeter. So it's a lot less than I thought it was. So that's good news. I guess it was just when I was trying it on and just holding it loosely together that it looked like there was a lot of excess fabric in the longest layer. Spoke too soon. The other side of where the zipper is going in has a lot of different layers. So this is the top layer, second layer, and last layer. And this kind of discrepancy scares me. But everything else lines up, so I'm hoping it's just a cutting issue, and that because it's the innermost layer, it won't matter as much as long as the top layer fits with the bodice, which it just has to. It just has to fit. So here the skirt is with the 3 layers, just basted together so I don't have to hold them all. So this is it. This is how it's going to be, the skirt. I can't see it. How does it look? I need to see it with the bodice to really understand if this is living up to my imagination. This is my 3rd time making this bodice, so I should be able to just breeze through it. I need to make 2 sides, one for the inside, one for the outside. It's basically exactly the same, and then you sew them together. I remember this being quite fast, so I might even have a finished dress today. I'm actually hoping for it because that would take a lot of stress off of my plate and I could focus on the trip I'm going on. One layer is done. Now I'll make another. I've made the second bodice, or the lining, and it's time to sew these 2 together. It's going to be really fun starting to see this bodice coming together and then adding the bias tape around the neckline too. I feel like when I reach that point, it's going to start to feel real. The bodice and the lining has been sewn together. I wasn't really able to press these seams apart in the way that I want to because I'm scared of ironing this fabric on the right side, on the shiny side. On some of my tests that didn't really go well. I'm going to try my best to just go slow and attach the bias binding around the neckline and try to keep these layers as neat and as apart as possible. but it's very silky smooth and looking very pretty. So I'm excited to try it on when that's possible. So it's been a whole weekend where I haven't been able to work on the dress. The last thing I showed you was me pulling the string through the bodice channel. As you can see, that's done. Now I actually only have 2 more days to work on this dress. I have about 6 hours today and maybe around the same time tomorrow. So this is the only time I have left, and then I actually have to pack my bags and go. So it's a really hard deadline. That means it's time to lock in. The things I need finished are the armholes. Obviously they're not supposed to be fraying and open like this. Then I need to attach the bodice to the skirt, do the zipper, and then do the lining and make sure that everything is nice on the inside. I will start by working on the armholes here, and then I will go on to the skirt and hopefully the zipper today. That is my goal, ending up having done the zipper at least today, and then I can spend tomorrow doing the inside and doing all of the nice finishes. That also means I'm not going to have time to edit this video before I go to Norway. I don't know at this point if it's even a cohesive video, but that's future me problem. But hopefully I can get some really nice video and pictures of the dress in Norway, and that will make up for the delay in an update. Now, no more time for chatting. Let's start sewing. I'm going to be trying a different method of kind of closing this armhole than what is in the pattern. The pattern just says to fold the edges in and iron them and then top stitch right down. But I'm not sure that that's really going to work with this fabric, and I would really like to avoid another stitch going through. Instead, I'm going to attempt a invisible slip stitch that kind of just disappears and makes it look really seamless and hopefully high quality. But I don't know if at this point I can even hope for high quality look. Maybe it just needs to be done. You're supposed to iron down the edges that you want to kind of seam together. But since I don't really want to iron it, I'm kind of just hand pressing it. If I do that hard enough, I will get a little bit of a line here that's easier to follow than just guessing where the next stitch should be. I'm really glad I ended up going with the hand-stitched option, even though that's probably a lot slower, but it just looks nicer, this finish. Now the other side is open because that's where the zipper is going in. So I'm actually thinking that I will do that at the end when I finish the lining and then close the zipper, so that I can sew it all in one. That means that the skirt has been lying over here waiting for its moment. That moment has now come, and it's time to join the bodice and the skirt. This is where it all starts to come together. So the original instructions are once again to just put the fabric right sides together and then finish the seam with a serger. But I would really like to avoid having that kind of raw finish on the inside. So I'm wondering if I could do a princess seam like I've done for all of the different skirt layers, where the seam is kind of enclosed. That would mean that I'd sew these together wrong sides first, flip them over to the right side, and then stitch them again. And then that way the seam on the inside would be enclosed. I don't know why I worry about this more than I did about the skirt seams, because it's exactly the same technique and that turned out really well. So maybe I should just go for it and hope that it works out. At this point, I mean, do I really have anything to lose? Let's take this to the sewing machine. I sewed it all together, wrong sides. So now I'm flipping it over, right sides together, and sewing it one more time to enclose that seam that I've just done. And that will hopefully finish the waistband. I couldn't resist trying it on. Oh my god! Oh, it looks so pretty. I was actually worried there for a second, but it looks so pretty. I can't wait to finish now. Also, the inside looks pretty good. It's just this princess seam like this. I much prefer this to having serged it, so I'm really happy I did that. Now, next step is to try to see if I can insert the zipper, which is also kind of nerve-wracking. I am thinking there are gonna be places where I have to go in with a little hand stitch in the end. But we are nearing the finish line and I'm so relieved that it looks like I am going to finish this. Okay, so I feel like the zipper insertion might get a little bit tricky. So I'm going to try to explain what I'm going to do. I have my opening here. I have 2 layers of bodice and 3 layers of skirt. I'm going to separate the innermost skirt and the innermost bodice piece, and I'm not going to sew them to the zipper because I want to save those to actually hide the zipper on the other side, so I get that seamless kind of finish. Right now I'm just clipping it in, but I will baste it with a few stitches. Isn't this zipper just like almost a perfect match to this color? I ordered it from another online shop than I did the fabric, so it was really just luck, I think. I've basted in one side of the zipper, and I actually did buy a zipper foot for the invisible zipper because you need like a special one. And I thought that it would work on my machine, and it's my mistake. I haven't tried it until now, but I can't figure out how it's supposed to work on my particular machine. So I'm going to hand sew the zipper in too. And maybe this is just a blessing in disguise because I will have a lot more control this way. Hopefully it will still be invisible like you do on the machine. I'm hand stitching the zipper And I'm going really close to the edge here, like the zipper foot would have done. It would have unrolled the zipper like this. So I am stitching right in here, and then when the zipper kind of folds back to where it is, that is when the zipper becomes invisible. Let me show you. If I close just this part that I've done, you can't see the teeth of the zipper. And then when I add the other side here, it's just going to look like a seam in the dress and not a zipper in the dress. But it is definitely slowing me down to have to hand stitch this. Now I'm suddenly nervous again if I'll make it in time with all of the hand stitching that I have to do. I have run out of time for today. I didn't get quite as far as I wanted to. I did do one side of the zipper, not the other side, but I will do that tomorrow, and then I will sew the lining to the zipper and do the last armhole. That is a lot of hand sewing, so it might be a late night that I have to do after I get home from work tomorrow, just to make sure that it's finished for the next morning where I actually have to go. And I also have to find time to pack. So it's getting down to the wire. The other side of the zipper is in, and I've just tried to finish this part down here. It didn't get quite as even as I would like it to, but at this point it's just how it's going to be. So closing the zipper, you can also see these two seams are not meeting up. It's just how it's going to have to be. Hopefully it's not very noticeable. This has probably happened in the assembly between the top and the bottom, and something to look out for next time, I think, is just to make sure that this length is the same on each side. But other than that, I think the zipper went in pretty nicely, considering it's hand sewn in. I'm able to zip up the dress for the first time. And a few things I'm noticing is I'm getting kind of like a bump right here from the zipper. You can kind of see it there. I'm just really debating whether it's worth it to try again. Pick it up and try again to avoid that. Also, obviously, my waistband here is not even. It's like being, I think, maybe pulled up by the string here. When I pull the string at the back, it pulls up this part of the waistband. I don't know, should I try to fix this? It'll take me a really long time, but I feel like it's kind of ruining the silhouette to have this sticking out. Do I even know how to fix it? I don't know. I think I've gone absolutely mad. I just took the zipper out because I can't do it with that bump at the side. It ruins the whole silhouette of the bodice. So I have to admit that this is my limit. I don't know how to do this correctly. So I will go back to the workshop, get some help, and hopefully I can insert the zipper right, and maybe using a machine as well, so it doesn't have to take as long. But it's always discouraging having spent time and effort on something that you have to rip up. I must admit, I'm pretty over this at this point, but I've come this far, and there's no going back. I'm going to wear this dress at the gala in Norway, and that's that. To my disappointment, the advice at the workshop was to avoid the machines and hand sew the zipper in once again. I also had to accept using needles to minimize the amount of shifting in the fabric, so I could avoid the bump I had before. This took way longer than I wanted it to, but there was no going back at this point. The helpers there worked some kind of magic on the steam iron to get the uneven fabric to behave, and suddenly I had a nicely aligned waist.
As soon as the zipper was in, I ran to try it on, and what you see here is the face of someone very tired, slightly sick, and so done. The zipper still had a little bit of a bump, but there was no way I was redoing it for the third time. Once that was decided, I quickly sewed in the lining, making the armhole the last thing I had to do. I couldn't make it before I left, so I ended up sewing it while on the road. And then it was time to finally go to Norway.